What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest stars sits down for what should be a light-hearted late-night interview, only to have the entire conversation spiral into one of the most uncomfortable moments in television history? Tonight, we're breaking down the explosive clash between Tom Cruise and Jimmy Fallon that left the audience in stunned silence and the internet absolutely losing its mind. This isn't your typical celebrity interview gone wrong. This is something else entirely. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us whose side you're on in this whole situation. Because trust me, you're going to have opinions. The Tonight Show set was buzzing with its usual energy as Tom Cruise walked out to thunderous applause. The audience was on their feet, and Jimmy was doing his signature excited greeting, shaking Tom's hand with that enthusiastic energy he's known for. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Tom sat down, smiled at the crowd, and Jimmy kicked things off with what appeared to be standard opening banter. Jimmy leaned forward with a grin and said, "So Tom, you've been doing press all week for the new movie. You must be exhausted, right? How are you holding up with this crazy schedule?" Tom nodded and replied, "It's part of the job, Jimmy. When you believe in something, when you've put years of your life into a project, you show up and you give it everything. That's what professionals do." There was an edge to his voice that wasn't quite hostile, but it wasn't warm either. Jimmy didn't seem to catch it, or maybe he chose to ignore it, because he pushed forward with his next question. "Well, speaking of professionals," Jimmy said, "I have to ask about the stunts in this film because I saw some behind-the-scenes footage and it looks absolutely insane. At what point do you think, maybe I should let the stunt guy handle this one?" The audience laughed, but Tom didn't. He sat back in his chair, and his expression shifted slightly. It was subtle, but if you were paying attention, you could see something change. Tom responded, "I don't think that, Jimmy. I never think that. When audiences pay their hard-earned money to see a movie, they deserve authenticity. They deserve to see real commitment, not some actor pointing at a green screen and letting computers do the work." Jimmy chuckled nervously and said, "Well, sure, but I mean, you're Tom Cruise. You could phone it in and people would still show up, right?" The audience laughed again, but this time it was more uncomfortable. Tom wasn't smiling anymore. "Could I?" Tom asked, his voice calm but pointed. "I suppose I could, but that's the difference between people who care about their craft and people who just want a paycheck and applause. I didn't get where I am by taking shortcuts or making excuses." Jimmy's smile faltered for just a moment. He glanced at his cue cards and tried to redirect. "Well, nobody's saying you take shortcuts, Tom. Everyone knows you're one of the hardest working guys in the business." Tom cut him off. "Do they? Because it seems like every interview I do lately, someone wants to make a joke about whether I should slow down or take it easy or let someone else do the dangerous work. As if commitment is something to be mocked." Jimmy raised his hands defensively, laughing awkwardly. Whoa, whoa. I'm not mocking anything, Tom. I'm just saying, you're not 25 anymore. None of us are. There's no shame in being smart about these things." The audience was dead silent now. You could feel the tension radiating through the studio. Tom leaned forward, locking eyes with Jimmy. "Being smart," he said slowly, "is understanding what it takes to be great. Being smart is knowing that if you want respect, you earn it. You don't coast. You don't make excuses. And you certainly don't sit behind a desk cracking jokes about people who actually put themselves on the line." Jimmy's face went pale. He stammered, I wasn't. I mean, that's not what I was trying to say at all, Tom. I have massive respect for what you do." Tom didn't break eye contact. "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like you brought me here to be the punchline. Another celebrity for you to poke fun at while you play the lovable host who never has to risk anything." Jimmy tried to laugh it off, but it came out shaky. "Come on, man, that's not fair. This is a comedy show. We joke around. That's literally the format." Tom's voice remained steady, almost eerily calm. "I understand the format, Jimmy, I've been doing this longer than you've been on television. But there's a difference between comedy and disrespect, and right now, I'm not laughing." The camera cut to the audience, and people were exchanging wide-eyed glances. Some looked uncomfortable, others looked fascinated, like they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Jimmy shuffled his papers, clearly trying to regain control of the interview. Okay, let's just reset here. I apologize if I came across the wrong way. That genuinely wasn't my intention. Let's talk about the movie itself. The story is incredible. The reviews have been amazing, and I know you're proud of it." Tom didn't respond right away. He just stared at Jimmy, as if deciding whether to let him off the hook or keep pushing. Finally, he spoke. "I am proud of it," Tom said. "I'm proud because we didn't compromise, we didn't cut corners, we didn't settle for good enough. And that's exactly why I get frustrated when people treat that level of dedication like it's some kind of eccentric quirk instead of what it actually is, which is the standard." Jimmy nodded quickly, trying to seem agreeable. "Absolutely. Absolutely. And that dedication shows on screen. It really does." Tom wasn't done. "You say that now, but 5 minutes ago you were asking me why I don't just hand things off to someone else. You were implying that caring too much is somehow a flaw. And that attitude, that cynicism, is exactly what's wrong with entertainment today. Nobody wants to commit. Everyone wants shortcuts. Everyone wants to be famous without doing the work." Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, but Tom kept going. "I've been in this industry for over 40 years, Tom continued, his voice rising slightly. "I've worked with legends. I've learned from the best. And the one thing they all had in common was an unwillingness to accept mediocrity. They showed up, they prepared, they took risks, and they didn't apologize for it. That's what separates icons from people who are just here for the moment." Jimmy finally managed to get a word in. "I hear you, Tom. I really do. And I think that's an incredible mindset. I just think maybe we got our wires crossed here. I wasn't trying to diminish what you do. I was trying to highlight how impressive it is." Tom's expression didn't soften. "Then maybe choose your words more carefully, because when you joke about someone's work ethic, when you question their choices, you're not highlighting anything. You're undermining it." The studio was so quiet you could hear the cameras adjusting focus. Jimmy looked genuinely rattled now, and the easygoing energy that usually defined his show had completely evaporated. Jimmy took a breath and said, "I think we should move on. Let's talk about your co-stars. You've worked with some incredible actors on this film." But Tom wasn't ready to move on. "Before we do that," he said, "I want to make something clear. I came here tonight because I respect your audience. I respect the platform. But I'm not going to sit here and be treated like some out-of-touch celebrity who doesn't understand reality. I understand it better than most. And part of that understanding is knowing when someone is being genuine and when they're not." Jimmy looked stunned. "Tom, I'm being genuine. I promise you, I'm a fan. I've always been a fan." Tom tilted his head slightly. "Are you? Or are you a fan of the idea of Tom Cruise? Because there's a difference. One requires actual respect. The other is just performance." Jimmy's face flushed red. He looked down at his desk, then back up at Tom. "I'm not performing right now," he said, his voice quieter than before. "I'm trying to have a conversation with you. And honestly, Tom, I feel like you came in here looking for a fight." Tom's eyebrows raised. "Looking for a fight? I came here to promote a film that represents years of hard work from hundreds of talented people. You're the one who decided to turn it into a commentary on whether I should be doing my own stunts at my age." Jimmy shook his head. "That's not what I said. You're twisting my words." "Am I?" Tom leaned back, crossing his arms. "Because I heard you pretty clearly. You asked when I would let the stunt guy take over. You made a crack about phoning it in. Those were your words, Jimmy, not mine." The audience was completely locked in now. This had stopped being an interview and become something else entirely, something raw and uncomfortable and impossible to look away from. Jimmy rubbed his face with his hands, clearly trying to collect himself. "Okay," he said finally. "You want honesty? Fine. Yes, I made some jokes. That's what I do. It's banter. It's how these interviews work. And maybe I didn't phrase things perfectly, but you're acting like I personally attacked you, and that's just not what happened." Tom's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. When you diminish someone's choices, when you question their judgment, that is an attack. It might be wrapped in a smile and a laugh track, but it's still an attack. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to make this more comfortable for you. Jimmy let out a frustrated breath. "You know what, Tom? I've interviewed hundreds of people. Actors, musicians, politicians, everyone. And I've never had someone sit here and accuse me of attacking them. Maybe, just maybe, you're being a little too sensitive about this." The moment those words left Jimmy's mouth, you could see him regret them. His eyes widened slightly, and he started to backtrack immediately. "I didn't mean," Jimmy began, but Tom cut him off. "Too sensitive," Tom repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "That's interesting. So now, I'm too sensitive for expecting basic respect. I'm too sensitive for calling out condescension when I hear it. Is that what you're saying?" Jimmy held up his hands. "No, that came out wrong. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to understand why this escalated so quickly. We were supposed to be having fun tonight." Tom leaned forward again, his intensity radiating across the desk. "Fun for who, Jimmy? Fun for you? Fun for your audience? Because from my perspective, the fun seemed to come at my expense. And I've been doing this long enough to know the difference between good-natured ribbing and someone trying to make themselves look clever by taking shots at their guest." Jimmy's jaw tightened. "I wasn't taking shots at you. If anything, I was complimenting you. I was saying you're so talented that you don't need to risk your life to prove anything." "That's not a compliment," Tom shot back. "That's you telling me you don't understand why I do what I do. That's you suggesting I'm driven by ego or insecurity instead of passion. And frankly, I expected better from someone who's supposed to be a professional." The studio audience was utterly transfixed. Some people had their phones out, clearly recording what was happening. Others just sat frozen, watching two famous men have what amounted to a very public argument. Jimmy took another deep breath, visibly trying to stay composed. "Okay, Tom, I think we need to pump the brakes here. This has gotten way too heated. Can we just agree that there was a miscommunication and move forward?" Tom studied him for a long moment. "A miscommunication," he said slowly. "That's what you want to call this. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement that maybe you crossed a line, just a miscommunication." Jimmy's voice rose slightly. "What do you want from me? I've apologized twice already. I've tried to explain where I was coming from. I don't know what else you're looking for here." "I'm looking for authenticity," Tom said sharply. "I'm looking for someone who can own their mistakes instead of making excuses. You said I was too sensitive. You implied I came here looking for a fight. But all I did was respond honestly to what you were saying. And apparently, that's not allowed." Jimmy threw his hands up. "Of course it's allowed, Tom. You can say whatever you want, but you're acting like I'm your enemy here, and I'm not. I'm a guy who made a couple of jokes that didn't land the way I intended. That's it. That's all this is." Tom shook his head. "No, Jimmy, that's not all this is. This is about a culture that celebrates mediocrity and mocks excellence. This is about people who sit in positions of influence and use that influence to tear down instead of build up. You have a platform. You have millions of people watching. And you chose to use that platform to question my judgment." Jimmy's voice cracked slightly with frustration. "I wasn't questioning your judgment. I was concerned. There's a difference." "Concerned?" Tom echoed. "You were concerned? About what exactly? My safety? My decision-making? My ability to know my own limits?" Jimmy nodded quickly. "Yes, actually. You're one of the biggest stars in the world. If something happened to you on set, it would be devastating. Not just for you, but for everyone involved in the production. So yeah, I think it's reasonable to ask whether all these risks are necessary." Tom's expression hardened even more. "And there it is. You think you know better than me what risks are necessary. You think sitting behind this desk, reading jokes other people wrote for you, gives you the authority to lecture me about my career choices." "That's not fair," Jimmy protested. "I'm not lecturing you. I'm having a conversation." "No," Tom countered. "You're passing judgment, and you're doing it under the guise of concern, which somehow makes it even worse. At least have the courage to own what you're really saying." Jimmy looked directly into the camera, then back at Tom. "I don't even know what I'm really saying anymore, Tom. You've got me so twisted around that I can't tell if I'm defending myself from accusations that don't make sense, or if I actually did something wrong. All I know is that this conversation has gone completely off the rails." Tom didn't blink. Maybe it needed to go off the rails. Maybe people need to see that not everyone is willing to play along with the script. Not everyone is going to smile and nod and pretend everything is fine when it's not. The camera operator zoomed in on Jimmy's face, capturing every flicker of emotion. He looked exhausted, frustrated, and more than a little angry himself now. "You know what your problem is, Tom?" Jimmy said, his voice taking on an edge. "You're so used to being in control that you can't handle a normal conversation. You can't handle someone treating you like a regular person instead of some untouchable icon. You came on this show, my show, and you've spent the entire time making me feel like I'm on trial." Tom's response was immediate. "If you feel like you're on trial, maybe that says something about your own conscience. I've simply been honest with you. If that makes you uncomfortable, that's not my problem." Jimmy laughed bitterly. "Honest? You've been hostile from the moment you sat down. You took a simple question about stunts and turned it into this massive confrontation about respect and professionalism and everything else. I've been trying to de-escalate this entire time, and you just keep pushing." "Because I'm not interested in de-escalating," Tom said flatly. "I'm interested in truth, and the truth is, you invited me here expecting me to play a role. The charming movie star who laughs at your jokes and tells fun anecdotes and makes everything easy for you. But I'm not an actor right now, Jimmy. I'm a person. And as a person, I refuse to be disrespected, even subtly." Jimmy stood up from his chair, something that almost never happened during interviews. He paced behind his desk for a moment, running his hands through his hair. The audience gasped quietly at the break in protocol. When he sat back down, his voice was strained. "I don't know how to do this interview anymore, Tom. I genuinely don't. Every time I try to move forward, you pull us back into this argument. So tell me, what do you want? How does this end?" Tom remained perfectly still in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "It ends when you stop treating this like a game. It ends when you recognize that the person sitting across from you has feelings and pride and standards. It ends when you understand that your platform comes with responsibility." Jimmy stared at Tom for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed. The frustration was still there, but something else had crept in, something like defiance. "You want to talk about responsibility?" Jimmy said. "Let's talk about it. You come on here acting like you're the only person who takes their work seriously. Like you're the only one who has standards. But what about your responsibility as a guest? What about showing up with good faith instead of treating every question like it's an interrogation?" Tom tilted his head slightly. "Good faith goes both ways, Jimmy. I showed up. I'm here. But I'm not going to smile through disrespect just because that's what's expected." Jimmy leaned forward, his hands pressed flat on the desk. "You keep using that word, disrespect. But I think what you really mean is that someone didn't worship you the way you're used to being worshipped. I asked normal questions, Tom. Questions that any interviewer would ask. And you turned it into a referendum on my entire character." Tom's voice remained steady. "If you think asking someone if they should let a stunt double take over is a normal question, then you don't understand what drives people like me. You don't understand what it means to care about something beyond your own comfort. "And there it is again," Jimmy said, his voice rising. "People like me, as if you're in some special category. As if everyone else is just sleepwalking through life while you're the only one who's awake. That's not passion, Tom. That's arrogance." The audience collectively held their breath. No one had expected Jimmy to push back this hard. Tom's eyes narrowed. "Arrogance is thinking you can sit there and psychoanalyze me when you don't know the first thing about what I've sacrificed. Arrogance is using your show to make yourself look good by making your guests look unreasonable." "I'm not trying to make you look unreasonable," Jimmy shot back. "You're doing that all by yourself. And you know what? Maybe that's the real issue here. Maybe you're so used to controlling every aspect of your image that you can't handle a conversation that doesn't go exactly the way you planned." Tom leaned forward until he was mere feet from Jimmy. "Control," he said quietly, "is what happens when you refuse to let other people define you. Control is what separates people who shape their own destiny from people who let circumstances shape them. If that makes me difficult to interview, so be it. I'd rather be difficult than dishonest." Jimmy laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Dishonest? That's rich coming from someone who's been performing this whole wounded pride act for the last 20 minutes. You want everyone to think I attacked you, that I somehow disrespected this great Tom Cruise. But all I did was ask questions, and your ego couldn't handle it." Tom stood up from his chair. The movement was sudden enough that the audience gasped. He didn't move toward Jimmy, but the shift in dynamic was palpable. "My ego," Tom said, voice low and intense, "has nothing to do with this. What you're calling ego is actually principle. It's a refusal to accept less than what I deserve. And what I deserve is the same respect I give to everyone I work with." Jimmy stood up too, not to be outdone. "And what I need to know," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "is why you thought it was okay to come on my show and turn it into your personal therapy session. You've hijacked this entire interview to make some point about respect and dedication, but what about my show? What about my audience?" Tom's response was immediate and cutting. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to be clever at my expense. You set the tone, Jimmy. I just refused to pretend I didn't notice." The two men stood on opposite sides of the desk, the tension so thick it was almost visible. Jimmy's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I think you should leave." The audience made a collective sound of shock. Tom didn't move. "You're asking me to leave?" "I'm telling you," Jimmy said, his voice firmer now, "that this interview is over. We're done here." Tom stood perfectly still for a moment, his jaw working. Then he nodded slowly. "Fine," he said. "I'll leave. But understand something, Jimmy. This conversation is going to follow both of us. People are going to talk about it. They're going to pick sides. And when they do, they're going to remember who remained composed and who fell apart." Jimmy's face reddened. "Fell apart? I'm ending an interview with someone who's been attacking me for half an hour. That's not falling apart. That's setting a boundary." "Call it whatever you need to," Tom said, already turning toward the exit. "But we both know what really happened here." Jimmy pointed toward the exit. "Just go, Tom. Please." Tom walked toward the stage exit, the audience completely silent, but before he disappeared through the curtain, he turned back one more time. "You know what the saddest part is?" Tom said. "I actually did respect you coming into this. I thought you were better than most of the people doing what you do. But tonight proved I was wrong." Jimmy's hands were trembling now. "Get off my stage!" Tom smiled coldly. "Your stage, your show, your rules. Enjoy your kingdom, Jimmy." And with that, Tom Cruise walked off The Tonight Show, leaving Jimmy Fallon standing behind his desk, the audience in stunned silence, and millions of viewers trying to process what they had just witnessed. Jimmy stood there for several seconds. Then he turned to the audience, his face flushed. "We're going to take a break," he said, his voice hoarse. The internet exploded within minutes. Clips spread across every platform. People argued about who was right, who was wrong, Was Tom justified or was Jimmy the victim? Entertainment shows spent entire segments analyzing every word, every gesture. Two men, two egos, two completely different perspectives on respect and professionalism. A conversation that spiraled so far out of control that it became one of the most explosive moments in late-night television history. Make sure you subscribe to stay updated on all the latest entertainment drama and drop a comment below. Do you think Tom Cruise was justified in calling out Jimmy Fallon? Or did he take things way too far?